Ecology and biology are cool, a lot to them. A lot we should be learning in school that is usually not taught. It should be stuff that everybody learns. Everybody should take some good biology is taught as natural history and not some of this nonsense of memorizing stuff that people do not understand and is not taught in a proper, from a good epistemology and a good philosophy of science. So it's just nonsensical floating abstractions that people don't know. Might as well be learning Pokemon. People need to start in the real world and dig out from there. As the great biologist Baron Heinrich says, I'll dig up this quote, something like, every great biologist is a naturalist, or first a naturalist, or a naturalist at heart, something like that. So, Baron Heinrich quote, so I remember, naturalist, biologist, sorry. But, then you got the quote, you got the source, you can read it in the show description later. Okay. Ecology, biology, things we can learn. When people learn this DNA nonsense, DNA is important. Some people need to know it. Most people don't. Irrelevant. Who cares? Does it really come up in everyday life? No. What people do need to know, and they don't learn science, they just learn how to memorize stuff, and they just have misunderstandings and misconceptions of what science is from learning things like that. Then they think it's confusing. They don't know. It's just making crap up. There's no basis for it. People are just saying stuff that's beyond us and we don't understand. Nonsense. Science is starting from the evidence of the senses. That's what Galileo did. That's what Marie Curie did. That's what Dr. Maria Montessori did in education. That's what Newton did and others. Start from the evidence of the senses, abstract from there. If people looked at some things like this, then they would see, they'd have a real grasp of what science is and how it works. And they could do some experiments on it or see people's experiments. So here, this was awesome. In a podcast I listen to sometimes, In Defense of Plants, the In Defense of Plants podcast. In episode 401, it came out on December 25th, 2022, I think it was. The episode's called Seeing the Forest for Its Bats. Awesome. So, good episode. I'll put a link to it. I recommend you listen. Good stuff in it. Just about bats and ecology and oak trees and hickories and all kinds of things. Really interesting stuff that makes sense and that can help us see how to make the world better around us and why some things matter. So we don't go by fear and ignorance and hurt things. As some people say, as I've said before, quote, what we don't understand, we fear. What we fear, we hate. What we hate, we seek to destroy, unquote. Tom Brown, exactly. But of course, for some of us, what we don't understand, we're curious about, we seek to understand so we can deal with it correctly and well in the world. Good episode, Dr. Lizz Beilke, if I pronounce it right, sorry, Beilke. She did some experiments to see how bats affect tree health. And this is something that goes back to, what was it? Someone Payne, I should have looked this up, I forgot. In the show notes, I'll put a link. But this guy Payne did work on purple starfish on the coast of Oregon, I think it was. But there'll be stuff so you can see for sure in the description field, in case I'm not remembering correctly. Payne, his last name, I forgot his first name, Thomas maybe, not like Tom Paine from before in American history, but, you know, common sense. But he was in class and the professor asked, why are the trees green? And of course, an answer you might think about is people studied chlorophyll and knew about that already, but he's thinking, no, but why aren't all the leaves eaten up? Awesome question. And that got Payne to thinking, and he did some research, and he found out how predators are very important. So a lot of people used to think there was a bottom-up drive for population control. Like deer could be controlled by the vegetation, but he learned how it's very important, the top-down drive, how predators control some prey, which controls the vegetation and helps make a healthy ecosystem, as happened in what people know about how wolves save rivers, the introduction of wolves to Yellowstone. It happened in Lamar Valley, not in another valley nearby, where wolves were introduced, from what I've read so far through the years. But and so people see how there's some keystone species, and people have done research on other predators to see how they matter. But in this one, Dr. Beilke went into some forest, and they put up some posts and then some connectors across the top. So you got this cage, skeleton of a cage. And then they got, she said, golf netting, like at golf courses to keep the balls from flying away. So it was stuff that was big enough to keep bats and birds out, but small enough to let insects in. And so they put some netting over some of the trees. And of course, you got the same framework somewhere else without the netting for control. Instead of just nothing, because maybe the skeleton pipe stuff affects it somehow. So we need things that are more relatable, of course. So you got these cages without the golf netting. Then you got some with golf netting. And she said they looked at, if I remember right, they'd go now and then, and they'd look at 20,000, 200,000 leaves, something like that. Bunch. But so they'd pick out some trees, they'd look at some leaves, pick out certain leaves on certain trees, and they'd go back and keep looking at the same thing every time. I don't know over what period of time, but she says, quote, "What we found is that in these plots from which bats were experimentally excluded, insect density was on average 3 times greater, and defoliation levels were on average 5 times greater." So that's a difference of seeing 14.5% change in leaf area versus 2.8% change in leaf area in these bat-excluded versus control plots, unquote. And this will be in the show description, so you can read along or look at it. Quote, "And then, additionally, we found that," so this is if you are combining the effects of bats on oaks and hickories. But if you separate this by tree genus, the story gets a little more nuanced. So we found that oaks were more affected by bat exclusion than hickories were. So oaks experienced 9 times more defoliation in these plots from which the bats were excluded than in these treatment plots. And hickories experienced on average 3 times more defoliation, unquote. So bats are important. They're predators. When there's fewer predators, they don't control the insects. Insects eat things up. So for example, some scientists think that without wasps, we would not exist. We would not have evolved, because wasps prey on some insects that eat the plants. And who is more numerous and more efficient at eating plants up? Who gets there first? The insects. Our ancestors never would have had a chance. Stuff would have been gone. So we couldn't have started off humans and come to be and evolve. Interesting stuff. And so again, when you had the things with the nets, so bats couldn't get in. With the hickories and oaks on average, there were 3 times more insects in there. The density was 3 times greater. No bats versus where there were bats. and 5 times more defoliation when the bats were excluded. So the insects would eat up. How much would they eat? So 14.5%. What's about maybe 16%, just around it, and that's about a sixth. So about 1/6 of the leaf area would be eaten when bats are excluded, but when they can go in there and control insects, only about a 30th, 2.8%, make it 3%, about a 30th. And again, if you look at a plot with no bats and a plot with bats, you look at oaks, the oaks where bats couldn't get in, insects had more free reign, they had 9 times more defoliation than these. And the hickories had 3 times more defoliation than the ones where the bats could control the insects. Interesting. In the show description for the podcast episode, quote, many bats need forests, and as it turns out, those forests also need bats. We are well aware that the majority of North Americans' bats eat insects. But what is the impact of their insectivorous diet on forest health? Join me and Dr. Lizz Beilke as we uncover the answers to this question and more, unquote. Good stuff. And likewise, I've heard, I don't remember the numbers, but owls and hawks control mice and rats a lot. I don't know, during the year or when feeding their young, they can eat and remove hundreds or thousands, one of them can remove hundreds or thousands of rats and mice from an area. I don't remember the exact numbers. I got to look that up a little bit. I forgot like which podcast that was in books and stuff. Oh, one of it was in a book. I got to try to find that again. I got it in a Audible. I got it marked somewhere. I just need to dig it up. But interesting stuff. Predators are important. So it's important to not get ignorant or fearful about something. We need to see how things are interrelated. What does this thing do in the environment, and how does it come back to affect us? In what ways? What are the things that it helps or not? So bats, predators, and like it's a mistake some people have made. Even Leopold, the naturalist, he made some mistakes, and he had to learn that predators were important. So some people wanted parks in the 1920s, and like, oh, we want deer and lots of deer, and it'll be so nice, and we can go hunt them, get rid of the predators, kill the bears, kill the cougars, kill the bobcats, kill the wolves. You know what happens? There's nothing to control the population, just like this that we read. The prey get more populous. They eat stuff up. They start dying. Diseases are spread because they're not controlled by the predators. The ecology is out of wonk, dysfunctional. It was a failure. You got a lot of deer to eat everything up. Can't support any more deer. It's gone. You got to have some plants that can reproduce, and young ones need to be able to grow. And that's what happened like in the Lamar Valley too. People noticed there was a dysfunctional river, and that's one thing that got people to start looking at it, what's going on. And it's all this backstory that helped people see how the wolves saved rivers. It didn't just pop out of nowhere. People knew a lot of stuff before that. But for beavers to be there, there need to be trees. And when the beavers are there, they can have dams, and there will be ducks and birds and so on and so forth, and more fish. But it's important. A lot of the stuff should be studied so people know more about what we need to survive and thrive and keep the world healthy. Because, we live in it, it don't live in us. And that's an important thing to grasp in biology. That stuff we can all use to help in our gardens, farming, supporting nature, knowing that it's important, all these things, whereas DNA, who cares? Some people do. It's important to know. Very important discovery, very important use. Interesting studying the science of it and how it's discovered. But in our everyday life, I want to know about ducks and raptors and hawks and bobcats and coyotes and things like that, not DNA. Never use it. So, nice thing, nice little paragraph from this episode, which connects to so much. So some good food for thought. Peace.